Well, now it's my great pleasure to introduce a great friend of mine who is a leader in the state think tank movement, John Tillman. Now, he is coming to us from a hostile environment. He lives in Chicago. You may have seen some things going on in Chicago. May have heard about the fiscal situation they've got in Illinois. Well, he is fighting the good battle in that state. John came to the think tank movement not through academic circles, but from the free enterprise sector. He's an entrepreneur, a businessman, and he has brought his marketing skills to bear on the think tank movement. It's really impacted us all. He tells us, he said, you know, your studies are great, we've got great ideas, the statistics are good, but we've got to tell the stories. We've got to tell about how our public policies impact people's lives. Got to do a better job of that, and he's absolutely right. In 2011, John won the Tom Rowe Award for the State Policy Network. In front of 500 people in our meeting, he accepted that award, and that has personal significance to me. This is the award that goes to the person who's had the most influence in the think tank movement around the country. But it's more important than that, because when I was fresh out of Georgia Tech, it was Trust Company Bank back then, Tom Rowe was one of my customers. And I would drive over to Greenville, South Carolina, and we'd have lunch. And inevitably, instead of talking much about his account, we'd start talking politics. Little did I know that he would start the South Carolina Policy Council and go on to found the State Policy Network, and I would end up at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. So that's a great honor for a great man who died several years ago, and that just tells you a little bit about John. John is regularly featured in the media. He's been on Fox News, BBC, NPR. He's been in the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Times. And in fact, last night, if you were watching John Stossel, the guest on his show for, I think, about 20 minutes in studio was no other than John Tillman. Please welcome our keynote speaker, John Tillman, CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute.
Thank you, Kelly, for that great introduction. I appreciate that very, very much. And it was very funny to have taped the Stossel show on Tuesday night in New York, and then I was in Washington yesterday for an event with Senator Jim DeMint. We launched our No Pension Bailout program. You can read about that in today's Wall Street Journal on the editorial page. But then I was in a hotel room here at the Great W Hotel. They don't get Fox Business News. So the entire team at the Illinois Policy Institute was watching the Stossel show last night and sending me text messages and telling me how much I screwed up. But I didn't get to see it yet, so I'm hoping that my wife and daughter did tape it and don't accidentally delete it for some other cartoon or home improvement show that they like so much. It is great to be here with you, and I love Atlanta. I like Atlanta more now that Larry Reed is here. And Larry is a good friend of mine, and for those of you who will stick around and see Larry at lunchtime, I think you'll enjoy his talk very, very much. I had a great chat with Kelly a couple days ago about Georgia. And I started to think about Georgia versus Illinois. And Kelly's a sports guy, and he's kind of competitive, and I'm a sports guy, and God knows I'm in Illinois trying to advance the ball for liberty, so I must be competitive and delusional at the same time. But I thought I would, do a little comparison of what our two states, and of course our great cities, Chicago and Atlanta, a little comparison and a little contrasting. So let's start at the top. Georgia gave America Jimmy Carter. We've given America Barack Obama. I'm not sure who's winning in that comparison. Who thinks Obama is worse than Carter? I'm just curious. Anybody? Yeah, I can kind of see you. I see a lot of hands going up. I would never ask you if you thought Carter was worse than Obama, because that's not what a good guest would do. Now, I got to say, though, in the presidential competition, we do have President Lincoln and President Reagan. So overall, I think in that category, Illinois has edged out Georgia just a little bit. Now, let's think of some other policies, though. You guys are a right-to-work state where workers are free to associate with. Illinois is a union state where union bosses rule and workers are not free but are under the union boss's thumb. So in terms of that policy and the good work that the Georgia Public Policy Foundation has done to protect your right-to-work status, you guys win that one. Now, each of us have an amazing big city in our states that I'm sure people that live outside of Atlanta probably don't like how big Atlanta is in terms of state politics and the power that Atlanta has, and that certainly is true in Chicago and Illinois. We call the areas outside of Chicago the downstate areas, but it is a great city. So let's compare Chicago and Atlanta. Atlanta is growing. People are moving here, as we just heard. Chicago is, I'm sad to say, shrinking. Our population is now at its 1920 level. So we're still the third largest city in the country, but think about one of the great cities in the world that is depopulating, and it's depopulating because of public policy decisions. Now, there's another comparison we could make between Atlanta and Chicago. You guys hosted the Olympics and did a great job with that. We all loved that. It was '96, right? We couldn't even beat Rio de Janeiro to host the next Olympics, and I think that you guys win that one as well. Let's look at public employee pensions for a second. Public employee and pensions, we are the poster child for how not to do it. How many of you have heard of our pension problems in Illinois? Any of you have heard about that? Worst in the country. $183 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. We're the perfect example of what you don't want to do. You guys are in the top 10 well-funded public employee pension system, and you've also converted to a hybrid program now with 401k as the dominant feature. We still have that DB program. You know, people call that defined benefit. In Illinois, we now refer to that as dead broke because there's no money left. So I think you guys are winning on that category too. Now, Kelly mentioned to me that you guys are really special when it comes to criminal justice and your criminal justice reforms, but we don't want to get into a competition with you on that because our idea of criminal justice is that we have 2 governors in jail, and we're trying to break that streak. So we hope, I mean, I'm not kidding, our last 2 governors are in jail, so our road is steep and long, but we are making material progress. I like to tell people, when I saw Senator DeMint yesterday, I said, you know, we're in the middle of a revolution in Illinois. It's just that not everybody knows it yet, but it is actually true. And I'm very excited about the progress we have made there, and I'm looking forward to the progress we make in the coming years. But these are not short-term battles. These are long-term battles. You know, one of the battles that we just came through was the Chicago teachers' strike. How many of you paid attention to the Chicago teachers' strike? That's that strike where about 29,000 Chicago unionized teachers in the Chicago Teachers Union walked out on 350,000 children. One of the things I mentioned repeatedly, we did a ton of media all over the country as well as in Chicago on that story. And one of the things that began to penetrate, which is why they eventually settled with a 98% settlement vote once they saw the tide start to turn, is that the Chicago public school system is a monopoly provider of educational services to those 350,000 children. And the Chicago Teachers Union, in turn, is a monopoly provider of the labor. And we know this is true because when that labor didn't show up, the kids didn't go to school. And you have one of the great, you have 3 pillars of great educational reform here in Georgia. In fact, only one of 3 states to have that. You have opportunity scholarships, tax credit scholarships, you have special needs scholarships, and you have a great charter program. And Kelly and his team here are doing great work on charters to demonstrate that charters do outperform traditional public school. And I think it's important that you think about that and continue to think, how can we advance our education reform even farther, faster? People like us in states like Illinois that are behind the blue curtain need states like Georgia to teach us and show us the way. And so we appreciate all the work you're doing to make that happen for the children. One thing I'd like to just mention, if I could, as a personal note, I got involved, as Kelly mentioned, out of business. I was an entrepreneur most of my life. I always like to mention singles and doubles, nothing dramatic. I do have access to a private jet. Yesterday it was Delta's. Tomorrow it will be United's. But I'm happy to share my private jet with 100 other people. I think that's an amazing miracle of the free enterprise system that I get to fly all over the country. I've been in New York, Washington, now Atlanta today, and I'll be in Champaign later today for a meeting, all by private jets made by the free market system. But I am an entrepreneur, and I have loved my entrepreneurial life, but I love it even more now that I'm involved in the liberty movement. When I first got involved, one of the things I was very surprised by is it is a little closed sometimes, and I was surprised by that. I mean, after all, we're for liberty, right? But people in the public policy movement, at least when I got involved about 8 years ago, are not always welcoming to us business guys who want to come in and get involved and bring our business acumen to the table. And political consultants in particular hate business guys who want to come and get involved in politics or public policy. But 2 people who extended a very, very warm hand of friendship to me when I first started were Kelly McCutcheon and Benita Dodd, who you just both saw speak. And I just want to let you know that you tell a lot about someone's character how they treat you when no one's looking, when there's no advantage for them to do that, and whether or not they extend the hand of friendship. So Kelly and Benita, I appreciate that very much. Thank you. You know, turning to political decision makers, one thing I think is interesting with so many of you here in the room, political decision makers do have the authority and, of course, the responsibility to pass good public policy. But the reverse is true as well, and good political decisions that advance liberty and change people's lives for the better cannot happen without the honest, high-quality intellectual work done by all of you in the policy movement, by the Georgia Public Policy Foundation and everyone else involved here. And I encourage all of you to think more boldly, to go farther. There's no reason you cannot be the state that everybody quotes instead of Texas. I know my friend Brooke Rollins will be here later today. I think you guys should lay down the gauntlet of competition with Texas, and I think rather than adhering to the status quo, as the majority whip said earlier, I think you should all think about trying to go farther, faster. States like Illinois need to see the bold leadership of states like Georgia, Texas, and the rest of the country who have the advantage that we don't currently have. You know, one thing I would like to just mention, of course, is that think tanks are known for focusing on policy. But I do think we must work harder for us to understand what's in front of us, to understand that policy changes go through a political process. We must understand that the political victories and losses are not controlled by people like us in this room. They are controlled by the persuadable middle voters who dip in and out of politics and elections every 2 years and are persuaded to one side or the other by stories, both large and small. Too often, we in the liberty movement are losing the battle for the hearts and minds of the American voter when we should be winning. And we are losing because we are preaching to the choir rather than to those yet converted. I gave a speech a few years ago to a local activist group, and a few weeks later I ran into someone who happened to be there, and he came up to me and he said something very profound. He said, "John, that speech you gave a few weeks ago was just great. You know, I don't remember very much about what you said, but I remember how you made me feel." Now think about that for a minute. The content was not the important thing, although it is important because the content is the foundation of how you make people feel. But what he took away is the emotional connectivity of the message. And that is what the progressives are so good at. The progressives make people feel. Look at the ongoing cult of Obama worship in Hollywood, in the media, and among our youth. It makes them feel good to be in the cult. Progressives make people feel good. We make people count numbers and look at income statements and balance sheets. That doesn't feel good, I know. Feelings, emotions, visual imagery, this is what persuasion is all about. This is what wins elections, and this is what helps the winners govern well. And we are in the midst, as I mentioned, of a great policy debate in America between two competing paradigms. This debate will be won by those who connect better emotionally and make people feel good about their leadership and their vision for America. Will we follow the principles of the Founding Fathers who championed the sovereignty of the individual and constructed government to protect that sovereignty, that liberty, that gift that the Founders gave us? I call that gift what the Founders believed, the liberty paradigm. Or instead, will we follow the government-centric approach of the European Union, where individual liberty is subordinate to the state, where the state is the primary allocator of resources and opportunity? I call this the progressive paradigm. We must fully understand that the battle lines are clearly drawn between those who believe in the progressive paradigm and those who believe in the liberty paradigm. And we should be winning, and we are not. After all, we should be winning because we have the moral high ground on our side. The progressives are an immoral force. And yes, I did say that out loud, and I'm going to tell you why I believe that. Liberty and the free markets are the moral choice. The greatest force for good ever created in the human sphere outside of our faith is liberty and the free markets. Progressivism and dependence are the immoral choice. Progressivism is a path to decay and decline for us as individuals and for American exceptionalism. Think about the liberty paradigm for just a minute. Think about it in the context of the progressives' class warfare that we see unfolding today. Class warfare is a form of bigotry. It shouldn't be tolerated any more than we would tolerate other forms of bigotry in our lives. Most people think of bigotry only in terms of race, religion, ethnicity, and sexual orientation, but at its core, bigotry is simply intolerance, which all too often leads to singling people out for attack based upon their group identity. Think for a moment about that small business entrepreneur. Think about the struggle, the pain, the trauma of wondering if he will make it. Think about the sacrifice for his family's future. Think about those who keep moving forward because the dream of rising still lives on in their soul. The progressives tell him that those who do make it, those who do rise, are evil and are exploiting the system. Crushing the dream is bad enough. Crushing the desire to dream is immoral, and we must not allow it. As the spending-driven debt crisis grows in America among the 50 states, we would never accept such vilification toward the poor and the elderly who consume taxpayer resources. We certainly would not accept such vilification toward the working class or minorities. So why do we in America tolerate the vilification of those most successful in pursuing the American dream? I think it is an outrage. And I think we need to say it out loud over and over again. According to the IRS, the top 1% of earners take home 17% of the nation's total taxable income, yet they pay 37% of the taxes. They are paying a disproportionate share of the burden of government, and yet the Occupy protesters, public employee unions, and even President Obama demonize them. Think about who the 1% are. They are entrepreneurs who have pursued life, liberty, and happiness. For most, pursuit of a dream is the root source of their wealth. They risked some of their own money and perhaps recruited investors to put in some of theirs. They hired workers to join with them in making that dream a reality. Some of those workers become 1%ers too. And how do those dreams come true? By operating a business that succeeds by serving others well. That is the essence of the free market and capitalism. This is the essence of our moral high ground. Despite all its flaws, despite the risks, despite the many challenges, success is achieved by serving others well. This should be championed, not vilified, whether that entrepreneur is in the basement or on their way to the penthouse. For most entrepreneurs and business people who become part of the 1%, it takes years of hard work, massive sacrifice, and perpetual resilience. It is not easy, as many of you know in this room. Many never make it and live lives of quiet disappointment at the dreams never realized. This bigotry against those who succeed must stop. We must all champion the entrepreneurs and those who work with them. We must champion them in the basement. We must champion them when they are rising. And most of all, we must champion them when they are in the penthouse and become part of the 1%. In my view, it is immoral to do otherwise. The liberty paradigm does not accept bigotry. Free markets and liberty are the moral choice, and we are on the moral high ground when we rightfully assert its value. On the other hand, think about the progressive paradigm. An ever-expanding government, drawing more and more people into dependency for their food, their shelter, their clothing, their education, and now their health care. Unions draw talented people into their Orwellian grip and limit their upside potential. After all union members are created equal in a terrible perversion of the phrase. The progressive paradigm creates an ever-expanding dependency class who are more and more limited by what I call the dependency ceiling. Yes, you can certainly achieve a baseline of security for you and your family, but what you give up is the very essence of freedom and the human spirit. This is the progressive paradigm, where despite good intentions among some, the result is to create a dependency ceiling, locking people in below their true potential in a distorted pursuit of equality. This is an immoral choice. We are selling the liberty paradigm. Progressives want to empower government over people. We want to empower people to pursue their dreams and lift the human spirit. So it is true that the battle lines are clearly drawn between those who believe in the progressive paradigm and those who believe in a liberty paradigm. And the progressives have had most of the advantages over the past 100 years. 100 years ago, the moral clarity was less certain. It was somewhat unknown even. Our society was beset by terrible problems, and people were looking for solutions. Sacrificing liberty to gain a little security seemed like a fair trade, even if it meant dependency instead of the code of self-reliance that was core to America's founding. Today, people feel that security again. Maybe not in this room, but around this city, around this state, and around this company, many people feel insecure. So we must explain liberty just as the founders had to. We must tell stories that help people understand what liberty is and feel its empowerment in their emotional souls. That is why the work all of you are doing is so important. Because if you don't seize the moral high ground and tell truthful stories about the greatest force for good, who will? Progressives hold advantages only because America has lost sight of a simple truth, and we as a movement have lost sight of a simple tool. The simple truth is that the free market system and liberty principles are the greatest force for good ever created in the human sphere. And I realize all of you know that, or you wouldn't be here today. But my point this morning is that we do not tell the world that in a way that it can understand, and thus affect political and policy decision-making. Clearly, we don't, or would liberty be so threatened as we see it today? I'm sure all of you, at least most of you who might be of a certain age, remember President Reagan's frequent theme about the idea that America is a shining city on a hill. Reagan used it well over and over again, even though Illinois, frankly, has very few hills. He understood the power of story, and he understood the power of repetition. The shining city on a hill is an aspirational, uplifting image that we each fill in our own mind's eye. We each, in our own way when we hear it, tell ourselves a little story about what that city on a hill means to us personally. That's why this quote sticks all these decades later. That city on a hill represents so many things, but we have lost sight of the most important thing that hill represents. Because you see, on that hill is the moral high ground of the liberty movement. The amazing truth is, and I really do think it's a miracle, is that our ideas are not only the best way to organize society in keeping with the founding principles, our ideas are the best way to help the poor and disadvantaged. Our ideas are the best way to help the poor and disadvantaged. It bears repeating. That simple truth that we must tell over and over again and thus regain the moral high ground in the policy debates and political fights that sway the persuaded middle is the thing we must take from here today, in my view. To tell this simple truth, we must tell stories about people with the right heroes. Stories and heroes that stick in people's minds. Stories based in truth and told in honest, emotional connections. We must take these storytelling lessons with us, fit them into our lives as legislators, as activists, as policymakers, and most importantly, as kitchen table advocates. We must leverage our stories about liberty and use their power to change hearts, then change minds, and then change laws. We too often tell the wrong stories with the wrong heroes. I'll use gas prices as but one example. Everybody's happy about the gas price down here. It's about $4.50 a gallon now in Chicago. Not long ago, I was at a gas station watching a woman fill up her tank. She looked stressed, and she was standing there with what appeared to be a grocery list in her hand, glancing back and forth from the list to the back seat where her two young children sat in car seats. Her eyes darted over the dials on the gas pump. They kept rolling up, first the pennies, then the dimes, and then the dollars. You've all been there, right? You've seen those numbers keep rolling, and they roll higher than they ever did before. It used to stop at $40 for her, but it rolled right on past and went to $45 and $50, $55 and $60, and then mercifully it finally stopped just past $60. She paused and she looked at her kids, and with a frustrating swipe of her pen, crossed another item off her list. She slammed the nozzle into the pump and was gone. That list was her grocery list, and her life and her children's lives had been changed for the worse because gas is about $4 a gallon, a little more than $4 a gallon in Chicago. When we talk about energy policy, we tend to make our stories hero the oil companies. We talk about expanding domestic production in the Gulf of Mexico, in Anwar, North Dakota, more fracking, more natural gas, off the Pacific or Atlantic coast, all to increase supply and thus lower cost. Those are important. But our hero is that mom at the gas pump who just crossed off some food items from her grocery list because President Obama is empowering government instead of empowering her. We need to choose better heroes and tell their stories. That mom is our hero. And we have an infinite number of heroes, sometimes found in places we don't look. Some time ago, I knew a college student who talked his way into a job at a gray iron foundry. You've likely seen video of these hot, dirty, dusty factories. A foundry is a place where they create liquid gray iron and pour it into molds and make small engine blocks and other heavy-duty parts. These are cleaned off and then put and sorted into bins and taken over to workstations, where our young, ambitious college student used handheld mini jackhammers and grinding tools to remove the imperfections and prepare them for shipment. This was very demanding work, but he went at it with enthusiasm. He pulled some strings to get this job because it paid more than working on the assembly line next door. He rocked through the first bin, and then another showed up, and then another. He soon noticed conversations at workstations around him as the veteran workers glanced his way. Being a clueless college student, he kept working. It wasn't long before the supervisor came over to him. Our college student turned and took off his ear protection and looked expectantly at the man. It was a very brief conversation. The supervisor said, "Slow down. You're going too fast. Just keep pace with everyone else. It dawned on our young friend that this is how a union shop works. You cannot be an outlier. If you are, then soon it will become clear that everyone is not an equal producer, that the rate of productivity is in fact kept lower than it could be. So he was told to slow down. What occurred to our young friend is that this union was creating a ceiling on his productivity, his desire to do well. The union imperative was asking him to be less than great, to do less than what was possible and worthy. The union ceiling was not for him. He was not going to live in that world, and he's often thought of those colleagues he knew back then, and we learned about their lives over that summer. Many were very good people with ambition and talent. They yearned to produce, but were told not to. He felt saddened when he realized that day by day, year by year, they each had their spirits crushed out of them by the union ceiling. That is immoral. Make no mistake, we must regain the moral high ground by telling the right stories with the right heroes, and even union members who yearn for the natural desires of the human spirit can be our heroes. Think about the progressive paradigm, drawing ever more people into dependency and shackling ever more of those who produce into tax-paying servitude to the state. That is immoral, and we must fight it with every ounce of our strength. Because remember, we are selling the liberty paradigm. The progressives want to empower government over people. We want to empower people to pursue their dreams and lift the human spirit. Liberty can win, and liberty will win if you, if I, if we together, if we the people, once again become storytelling advocates telling the greatest stories ever told about liberty. You have the passion, or you wouldn't be here this morning. You have the knowledge and confidence to regain the moral high ground and see our liberty policies put into law. All it takes is a few storytelling heroes among you. I hope each of you will become a storytelling hero about the greatest force for good ever created in the human sphere, liberty. If you do, then we can win the hearts, and then we can win the minds, and then we can change policies that will change people's lives for the better. And be bold here in Georgia. Compete with Texas for greatness. There's no reason Texas should be getting all the laurels. You should be getting those laurels. Don't accept the status quo. You have the ability to go farther, faster, and help lead America by what you do this session and in the years to come. I know from my own life that policy changes lives for the better or for the worse, because you see, that story about the woman at the gas pump is a true story, and of course it's true today. But it was true in 1973 when I was 14 years old, and that woman was my mother. She had 3 boys, she was divorced, and the oil shocks had just hit and gas prices were skyrocketing along with home heating oil. It was very, very tough. Real people are hurt or helped by how well we live up to the founding fathers' gift of liberty to us. Your involvement with the Georgia Public Policy Foundation and this conference and in this public policy debate today is crucial to changing people's lives for the better. And you probably have guessed that factory worker in the foundry, that was me. I was so naive. Those lessons have stayed with me, and that is why even today I know there are union heroes yearning to be free of that union ceiling. We need to help set them free. If we do this, if we become great storytellers telling the greatest stories ever told, then the world will know a simple truth that is already known to all of us in this room. For the truth is that free markets and liberty are the greatest force for good ever created in the human sphere, and not just for the middle class and the affluent, but for the poor and disadvantaged. That is our moral high ground. And we know that when liberty prevails, prosperity surely follows. And not just prosperity of the material kind, though that is certainly good and necessary, but prosperity of the human spirit. That is what we are fighting for. That is our moral and just cause now. That is our moral and just cause tomorrow. And that will be our moral and just cause forever. Thank you so much for being here today.